Hello, friends. In this episode, I sit down with Jake Cahill of CCS Tech, where he creates web scraping automation bots and also the technology that can be used to circumvent those bots from scraping your site's content. Really enjoyable talk, and I learned some things, so I hope you do too. You can find all of Jake's content details in the show notes. As always, you can email me at podcast@dave-albert.com or on Twitter at Dave_Albert. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Dave Albert. In this show, I talk about technology, building a company as a CTO and co-founder, and have guests to discuss their roles in technology and entrepreneurship. Today, I'm joined by Jake Cahill. Thank you very much for joining us, Jake.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Would you give us a little bit of a history of yourself?
Yeah, sure. I am a web developer, bot specialist, data scientist, and I know a lot of that kind of sounds like they're super different. Like, oh, he's one of those utility knife developers. I'm a software engineer in Maine, USA, and my job, basically, I'm a contractor and freelancer, and my job is to develop either web crawlers or web crawler filters for companies in my area. A lot of what I've done in my career stems from what I like to call that childlike curiosity and a real lack of caring what catches fire.
I can relate.
Yeah, a lot of what I learned about with computers, my first time with a computer, I took it apart and put it back together, and it literally burst into flame. Power supply caught fire, hooked up backwards. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. My thought was, if it bursts into flame when it's broken, what can it do when it's working? And that's what kind of got me into it. And I tinkered with a lot of stuff throughout my life. And after high school, actually, I trained as an electrician. And I got accepted by a union and all that stuff to be a residential electrician. But the ethics, I guess, of a union kind of, I was torn by them, so I decided to kind of back away from that. And I ended up working in IT. I worked as an IT technician and then as a network engineer. And basically what it came down to was I worked at a company that was really understaffed. It was a really, really profitable banking company, and they were really understaffed. For 1,000 employees, there were 5 IT people and 1 software developer for the whole company managing everything. So I wore a lot of hats, and a lot of my job I had to inevitably automate, and I taught myself code to do that. And it just kind of snowballed from there. That the one developer in the company found my source code on a Team Foundation server because it was a Microsoft shop, and he kind of came to me. I thought I was in trouble because I'm not supposed to have access to that. And in fact, he actually was really happy that there was somebody else that liked code. And he, taught me and mentored me a little bit. I wanted to switch over to the software development side of the company, but I never ended up being able to before I left. And but from there, I just dove into it. I wrote C# for a while, and then I started with Python code. And something that I really, really enjoyed doing that I found that I needed to do a lot was research. And I found that I have to Google things and do things manually a lot. So seeing as when I really got into code, it was to automate what I had already done manually. I figured why not, do that with like the web. So rather than going and copying and pasting stuff by hand, learned the request library and URL lib and Beautiful Soup and Selenium and all these, web scraping libraries. And then found that on some websites, you'd get filtered after a while. And At that point, this was long before Cambridge Analytica. This was long before, data collection was this malicious just juggernaut that was worth a multi-billion-dollar, corporations and things like that. This was when basically web filters were there not to necessarily protect privacy, but to protect cost. It was, if you're even with Python's GIL, concurrency is still a thing. True parallelism isn't, but you can still hit a web server with hundreds or thousands of requests per second if you want to. And a lot of times with like AWS gaining steam, then, you paid for CPU cycles, you paid for everything. So, a lot of times you were filtered simply because that website had no chance whatsoever of selling you anything. You were taking their resources and they couldn't make money back. The problem was I got good at that. And then the whole data mining fiasco exploded in everybody's faces. And unfortunately, at that time, I was doing web scraping for like lead gen. There were times you'd scrape forums for customer information or email addresses people could put into MailChimp. And yeah, I will totally admit at that point, this was, again, before it was like demonized. At that point, I was really part of the problem. Like I was helping companies that weren't necessarily spammers. They were like, but they just never heard that kind of data collection was doable for somebody other than a big tech company. And, I was there. So they, but then when all that kind of hit the fan, I was like, wow, this is a really unethical game at this point, collecting personal data on people. So I backed away from that. And now I do build data aggregators. That's something that I do a lot. And I do have a really strict kind of moral code about it, though, that I will collect product information and usage information and basically information on products and processes, but not on people. I kind of draw the line at like, hey, can you get me these email addresses, or can you find me the CEO's information on LinkedIn? And it's like, yeah, I could, but I'm not going to. So I'll collect like company data, usage data, or product data, but not personal data. And then kind of flip the other end to, well, I have at this point 5-6 years developing web automation and data scrapers. Why not teach filters to be smarter, to detect bots built by people like me that are after personal data, that are looking to scrape Facebook's API in order to get all of your connections and everything like that. So basically, I stopped collecting people's data and then started building systems to defend people's data while at the same time gathering company data. So basically, that's how I double dip in the bot industry. I build bots that can get past the filters I build, and then build filters to keep people like me out.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Yep. So who would be like your typical customer or client?
Typical customer or client, it's like a small to medium-sized business that does a lot of going to their distributors' websites who are also small to medium-sized businesses and basically copying and pasting data in by hand so that they can send it to their customers. So like when they get a customer request, hey, do you guys have, this particular product in stock? Well, usually the customers that I have are either drop shippers or they're, they don't have a physical warehouse. They can't just check. So they've got to go to the distributor. They've got to send the distributor an email or check their stock levels. So what I basically do at that point is build bots that will allow them to, with one click, have a scraper go out and grab it, or actually build their own database that runs, every 2-3 hours against their manufacturer's website so that they have a push button solution to be, no, my distributor doesn't have it in stock. So basically any business that doesn't have the tech power to build an API that needs to contact another business that does not have an API. Okay. And then as far as personal data goes, it would be, with GDPR in Europe and that same kind of legislation being fought here in the US, trying to get it in place. A lot of people are really, really sensitive about their consumers' data, their customers' data, whether it's a forum or a blog or things like that. I've heard on one of your podcasts, actually, I listened to one of the episodes that you get several pings a day from China. A lot of people, they deal with that. When you have to go into Google Analytics and set up a bot filter just so you can see how many actual people have come to your website, that's an issue. And usually the number goes down by like a factor of 10 when you filter out bots. So that's also where I come in. If you have a small website and you don't have the money to pay the licensing for, a learning IPS or an IDS or one of the big Cisco products or something that actively filters connections. And then when connections get passed, it learns how they got passed. If you don't have that kind of licensing bankroll, then I'd build something personalized for you. Granted, it's not very modular. If your business changes, I'd need to reconfigure it because, you want me to do it in 3 weeks. It's not something I can make very general. But still, that's my typical customer. Yep.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. So I ran a really small, restricted diet food e-commerce site for a little while.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of manual work in taking all of the gluten-free foods and dairy-free foods and getting the content from the manufacturer's pages and trying to copy and paste that into Shopify. So I could totally see how
absolutely
I would have thrown so much money at you to not have spent days and days and days of that.
Yeah. One of the customers that I like a lot that I've dealt with in the past, I haven't heard from them in a couple months, so I'm assuming everything's okay. Or I've been fired. They found someone else. That's typically how it goes in development. You either everything's working or they replace you. But they were a middleman for grocery stores. So they would usually have to access the FDA's database 100 times a day to get information. They also had a database that was from the farmers to the wholesalers, like what farmers were charging per unit or, for their produce or meat, whatever. And a lot of times they would help both the farmers set their wholesaler pricing and also the wholesalers set the grocery store, the retail pricing. But the problem was that they would manually be going into this Excel spreadsheet. They'd have to download the Excel spreadsheet 100 times a day, because it updated every 10 or 12 minutes, something crazy like that. And basically I built a bot that did that for them. So every time, I didn't put in a listener, but every time that the CSV or Excel spreadsheet was updated, which is usually like every 10 or 15 minutes, the bot would reach out. It was set as a wget on their Linux server. It would reach out, download the CSV, and then use pandas or Beautiful Soup if it was an XML to parse it, and then feed the information into their own personal database. So they basically automated half of their day. Both of these guys were able to up their productivity, and they were able to go home before 8 p.m., which was great. It was just a two-man shop. They were just making it work. Sitting in this co-working space, 12, 14 hours a day, and with a little bit of automation and a one-time outlay of funds, they were able to, cut that workday at least in half, and then, buy an actual office space in downtown Portland, which is pretty cool. And that's ultimately what I love about web automation is so much of the web is just HTTP requests or HTTPS or TPS, whatever, layer you want to put on top of your HTTP. And, these servers, that's kind of the thing that I love so much about it is these machines, our computers, the servers, web servers, or even IDS, IPS web filters, they all talk. You just need to know how to listen. And that's a concept I've tried to explain to people a lot because I'm sure as a tech guy yourself, a lot of people will ask you, how do you do this? I can't even work my iPhone. And it's like, well, it's kind of like asking somebody who speaks both English and German, how do you understand that person speaking German? It's like, well, they're telling me what they want me to know. I just need to know how to listen.
Yeah.
So, I think people get technophobic and that's stuff, but that's kind of my mission is to dispel this stuff or at least make them not have to deal with it by automating it. Yeah.
That's what's funny is that balance that good tech people have to have of both fanaticism and laziness. You have to be some sort of lazy to want to automate everything.
Absolutely. That is so true. Oh my word. I never thought of it that way. I go through my life trying to tell myself I'm not lazy, but that way, that's like my fundamental driving force is to not do stuff. And that's absolutely true, which is why I will spend so long writing a script so that I don't have to do stuff anymore. But you think it's kind of like counterintuitive. It's like, I'm going to write the scripts where I don't have to do stuff. And you spend like 6 weeks doing it and then it changes and you start all over, not realizing 6 weeks for no reason. And you're starting over again. Okay, that makes sense. I think as a tech person, you also need to be it's kind of like in sports when something bad happens, someone says short memory. That's kind of something we as tech people need to embrace as well. And we all have short memories. Like as soon as something stops working, we just go right into it again, even though the last time we dove into it, we like lost half our friends and hadn't seen our family in 6 weeks. We don't remember that part though, because this is new and it's interesting and I want to know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like the whole, the swings between thin client, fat client, thin client, fat client, you know, so first there were mainframes and then there were desktop applications and then there were web applications and now there's progressive web apps. Where,
the PWA.
So, I mean, it just keeps going back and forth and back and forth.
Absolutely. I find that a lot of our job as engineers, as software folks, is to solve problems that aren't problems. Like, I think a problem becomes a problem when it's something that's important. But a lot of the problems that we solve aren't really problems. They're like nuisances. It's like a problem would be you have a flat tire. The problems we solve is like your tire pressure is a little low. Like they're not really issues. They're really not a big deal, but we spend a lot of time and effort solving them. And that's what I love about it.
Oh, you know what? I have a framework that will help you with your low tire pressure.
Yeah, to me, that's what I love about it though, is it's kind of like problem solving is at the root of what we do. And I honestly think that as a developer, like, I don't care what the problem is. Once I know that somebody wants it solved, or even that I want it solved, it becomes an obsession. It's like, I need to solve this issue. It's kind of like when you have that Rubik's Cube that you've been working on for 12 years and you still haven't solved it, but you work on it every day. It's because it's like, I need to solve this stupid thing. Like at that point, it just becomes the principle of it. Like, I don't care if people really need to get Facebook messages in a second early, but they said they do, and I don't know how. So that's what I need to solve, is because I don't know how to do it. It makes me feel angry, so I'm going to learn, you know. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I can 100% relate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your company's name, that's CCS Tech, is that correct?
Yeah, CCS Tech. Yep.
Does that stand for something, or?
Well, when I started fixing computers when I was a kid, it was Cahill Computer Solutions. Yeah, but that was really long. So we just shortened it to the initials. Unfortunately, CCS doesn't really say what your business does. And I didn't want to be one of those people that hands you a business card with just 3 letters on it. You're supposed to figure it out. So we changed it to CCS Tech just so that it would allow people to know what we did. And on our branding and signage, people wouldn't have to think or investigate as to what this company was. They'd know, oh, that's a technology company. They do something with technology. So yeah, it was more of like a branding thing than anything else.
All right, cool. So with the I don't want you to give away any of your trade secrets, but what sorts of AI, ML types of techniques and algorithms are used for the adaptive scraping or the protection?
Well, scraping and protection, it's tough because when you're using like your ML, I mean, even something as simple as like your linear regressions or your K nearest neighbors or any of the K algorithms, like a lot of times when you're talking about web filters ultimately don't use ML that often. Like if you're putting a web filter, most of your common hosts, like even the bigger ones like GoDaddy, or even if like WordPress or WP Engine, a lot of those filters are really, really bad at pattern recognition. Really bad at it. And I think if we do build, ML algorithms that look at how proxies are cycled, but we don't actually put them in any of our bots, honestly, because we don't need to. A lot of the ML stuff that I will use is I'll monitor the free proxy sites. Like my favorite one that I actually use in a lot of my own projects to cycle proxies is, I think it's freeproxy.net. And basically you build a scraper to pull down a big dictionary of IP addresses, and then you use another scraper to pull down a big dictionary of user agents, and you just cycle them. And what I find fascinating is this technique's by no means new. It's not even like middle-aged, it's ancient. And these filters still don't do anything about that. If you cycle your user agent, if you cycle your IP address, even within the same country or the same state, like if you use those services and you get only United States or only UK IP addresses, as long as they're on like a different subnet from the internet service provider, these filters don't even check. Even if you use those different IPs to access the same page 100 times in a minute, they don't check for it most of the time. They don't care. They see, nope, different user agent, different IP, must be a different person. Come on in. And I think part of that is due to, cost of implementing something that learns and watches. But a lot of the machine learning that we will actually put into things is based on basically seeing where these proxy IPs come from, and if there's any pattern to the addresses. And basically figuring out the country of origin's not terribly difficult, but basically where do these IP addresses come from? Is there any numerical pattern to a proxy IP address versus a legitimate one? And if there isn't, then is there a numerical pattern to IP addresses that come from a certain proxy service? Is there a filter that we can use based on the IP address itself that basically knows before it's been blacklisted, hey, that is a proxy IP because it meets this certain formula? Even if that proxy IP is brand new, it's within 5 minutes of being released, you could basically feed it into a calculation and see if it is a legitimate IP or if it's a proxy IP. And proxy IPs, again, they are legitimate. They're purchased from internet service providers. It's not like they're dummies. They're hosted somewhere. But those proxies are not purchased by hand. They're automated. They're generated via automation, just like our bots are, which means if it's automated, then there's a pattern to it. That's why we use the term pseudo random numbers in programming, is because nothing's truly random when you ask a machine to do it. But as far as our bots go, we don't really need to use machine learning to get these bots around things. I mean, the most complicated thing we've really ever needed to do to keep a filter from totally shutting us down is if you're using like an XML parser, an HTML parser, in a requests library, that's really, really fast. That's what we do most of the time. A lot of times we multi-thread them as well, while trying to respect the web server.
Yeah.
But sometimes you switch user agents, you switch IPs, you still end up getting shut down. If you use a web automation like Puppeteer or Selenium, and when you try to connect, you retrieve the page and then use Selenium to click on a link rather than submitting it via JSON request or an HTTP request, the filter will not even recognize it because you click the link rather than submitting it. They're not smart. They don't. AI is not required for web scraping.
Sure.
But when it comes to trying to defend against filters, I think that's where machine learning has a ton of potential. Is we can't unfortunately do anything about it now, but if we watch the bot ecosystems that are out there, and I don't mean botnets. I think a lot of people, when they hear the word bot, they think of something evil, and most bots are not. They're simply curious, I guess is the best word to use. They're not trying to get anything or enslave anything. They just want information.
Yeah.
But the problem is they tax web servers, and if we watch this ecosystem, that's why we watch bot frameworks a lot, like your Scrappies and Seleniums, even Beautiful Soups, request libraries, response libraries, how people are submitting JSON requests. That's where the key to blocking them is. And again, we can do that on an individual basis, but if we were going to release a universal framework for blocking all bots based on this pattern, our technology is simply not there yet. And when I say our, I mean mine. I'm a lone engineer. So developing a framework that would work under all circumstances for filtering bots for all use cases is very difficult. But I think that's where machine learning has a lot of potential for learning how to kind of basically decompile or deconstruct rather the algorithms that are used to purchase these proxy or Tor IP addresses, and therefore how they're built so that you can filter them.
Okay. Well, do you have any issues dealing with services like Cloudflare and Akamai as the scraper as opposed to the protection?
Well, I mean, I haven't run into issues with them. I mean, if you're gonna use like a network VPN, the VPNs and like network VPNs are tricky only because the traffic's encrypted. But basically any information that you can make via an HTTP request, like a post or a GET request, is pretty much available. And that's what's tough with web scraping is a lot of times if you ask the web server, hey, can I have this? It really doesn't check that often, whether or not you should. And if it's not behind a paywall or authentication, it'll just hand it over. And if you're talking about like content delivery networks, like CDNs, well, again, that makes it difficult in that you can't get the latest information, but it depends on how long you push your cached information out to your CDN. If you're updating your content to, your Cloudflare service in Spain and your other one in Frankfurt, your other one in California, if you're pushing it out every 10 minutes, it really doesn't affect me that much because it's got all the information that it needs. And a lot of times if you're going to use, say, the requests library, requests allows for redirects. And what does a CDN do? It caches certain information. If the information that you want is not available, it redirects you back to the home service. It redirects you back to the source. And if you allow your bot to just follow that redirect, the Cloudflare and content delivery networks will actually push you back home rather than blocking you completely. But again, the CDNs are just another server. So as long as you can convince that particular cache server in Spain that you need the information that's located in Mountain View and you're a person, it will shove you along just like any other post request or get request.
Yeah, I just know that I have with either like my Nagios alerts or my Slack bot who was doing, just checking the health of some applications. I've locked myself out. Well, not locked myself out, but it's a Cloudflare has detected unusual activity because I was hitting it too hard with an automated script.
Yeah.
So I just
that's actually
they were a little smarter than your typical.
Well, and I'm not saying that they're not, but I think the level of intelligence that I've seen from any sort of filtering system, they usually will filter based on one of three things, or a combination of them: IP address, user agent, and how fast you're hitting them. So, for instance, respecting the web server will actually get you a long way. Like if you want to collect 1,000 requests per minute, but you throttle your bots only collect 10, it's a matter of being the least the least prominent annoyance to whatever the filter is, because there are other filters hitting it much harder. So flying under the radar is also huge. So like you said, you were hitting it really hard with a script. Well, I'm sure if you throttled that script only like 3 or 4 requests per minute, sometimes that's not always the case, especially if you're checking in on something and you need instant information. But in the field of collection of data, really time's not a factor as much as you think. So as long as you slow the bot down and you're the least squeaky wheel or the least pain in the butt to that filter, that content delivery network, that firewall, ultimately it won't check you that hard. So if you make even like a marginal attempt at displaying yourself as not a bot, it ultimately has better things to do with its time, and it has bigger fish to fry, so it lets you through.
And that's still so much faster than a human could do.
Absolutely. You try copying and pasting 10 things from 10 different web pages in a minute. That's tough.
Yeah.
That's tough.
And the bots don't usually have to take restroom breaks. So.
No, they do not. They can run 24 hours a day as long as you do not mind the sound of a fan running in your old rack-mounted Dell server. Or if you do it in the cloud, somebody else has to worry about the fan running. Although that is expensive, I will say. Yeah. If for any aspiring bot developers, if you would like to build a web scraper, don't host it in the cloud. Don't do that until you're making some serious change from it, because bots really don't take up a whole lot of memory, but they will eat CPU clock cycles like you would not believe. And they will hammer the limited amount of bandwidth you have. If you think 2 terabytes of download bandwidth is a lot, download 3 or 4 megabytes worth of web pages 10 or 15 times a minute for 24 hours a day. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot. That adds up really quick. Yeah. So just do it on an old desktop that somebody throws away.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think the next thing that's going to happen in this space might be? What do you think it'll be, and what do you hope it'll be?
Well, I think that there will probably be laws in place that allow websites, hosts, and domain registrars to actually prosecute. And not that there aren't now. It depends on where you live. Like in the United States, not only does it depend on the federal laws, but it depends on the laws of the local area where the requests originate. And of course, in the US, anybody can sue you for any reason or no reason at all. They just have to prove that they lost money or face in their business over it. But I honestly think that the next move in this space, due to high profile breaches and things like misuse of data, I think there's going to be a big clamp down on it, which makes me a bit nervous for sure. But then again, half of my business is helping to fight these things, so maybe it'll be good. I don't know. But for instance, like any website that relies on collection of data from other sources, let's say like Trivago or Kayak, a lot of travel websites that have the information from different airlines, all of these websites rely on a data aggregate bot of some kind. I mean, all of them, because not a lot of the smaller websites, like if you're going to get the flight times from the airport in Jackson, Mississippi, or Mobile, Alabama, smaller, not huge cities, if there even are ones there. But if you're going to get, the Flagstaff Airport's flight times, they don't have an API for you to tap into. You've got to go get it. So all of these bots like this, data aggregates, have been around for years. The problem is they don't do any harm, really. It's when they start interfering with elections or when political motivations become involved, which seems to be the case in a lot of legislation. It's not a big deal until it affects government. Yeah. And it's starting to affect government, which means it's going to be a big deal soon. What I hope the next step will be is not necessarily like a crackdown on the use of them, but maybe guidelines on what's acceptable and what's not. And there can be some confusion because folks think, well, isn't that the same thing? Not really, because if somebody comes out against bots, especially a government, even if they have rules in place that where it's okay, you're still demonized a little bit. You're still the bad guy, even if you're following the rules. I would like for people to understand what services rely on data aggregators, what services rely on web scrapers, how a lot of the web is fundamentally built on web scrapers. Has anybody ever heard of Google? They use a ton of web crawlers.
Yep.
I think making like the robots.txt file, that you have to abide by that. Right now, it's kind of a guideline. Like it's okay to ignore it if you want. But I think forcing people to rely, to basically allow or disallow, and then forcing bot developers to have to obey that. Having there be real legitimate consequences, I think, is what's next. I would like there to be consequences because I would like there to be rules. Everything in the Wild West is allowed until somebody stands up and says no, and then everything is disallowed.
Yeah.
And that kind of like all or nothing, going to extremes, I think is where bots are headed. I hope not, because one, it's probably going to break a lot of the internet, and two, it's what I do. So I would like to be able to continue doing it within rules. And a lot of us, I've talked to a couple other bot developers, a lot of us we have our own moral code and ethics, and some are a lot more lenient than others. I try to hold myself to a standard where I'm really not taxing a web server. I have a blog series that only has one part up right now. The second one's coming, about proxy cycling and bots and things like that. And the biggest message that I give to people who want to learn is respect the web server. Know that if you're hammering a web server that's only got a gig of RAM and a really weak processor, your thought can't be, if this is their livelihood, they should have a better server. That's not up to you. Yeah. That's not up to you at all. So you have to stay within the constraints that person thought they needed, because it's also not up to you to take their server down and DDoS them because you feel like it. But I think if that is just a general law or at least a rule, rather than a moral code that can very easily be thrown out the window when there's a big enough check involved, I hope that's where it goes. I'm nervous that it won't, but I hope that's where it goes.
I don't know. Usually it's there's an overcorrection before there's a correction back to reality.
Yeah, there is. And honestly, if somebody tries to ban bots, you can guarantee that, there will be a certain player from Mountain View, California, that's going to step right in and fire their lobbyists up, and that's going to be that. But that's in the U.S.
There'll have to be at least two even. Microsoft still has Bing.
Oh, my word. Okay. Yeah, that's true. I forgot. And then, but even like DuckDuckGo,
Yeah.
which everybody loves DuckDuckGo because of its privacy. But think about it. What happens when people come out against bots and DuckDuckGo says, hey, I'm trying to advocate for privacy and I use a bot.
Yeah.
And what you're about to do is going to take down this private, no data collected on the user's search engine. What then? We're all going to go back to Google. We're all going to have our lives invaded. And what are you going to do about it? So that becomes a really, really, really complicated topic, especially in the government of where I live in the US. But globally, it kind of makes us re-examine not only how the web works, but how we use it, because nobody does anything without Google. And if Google goes away, or at least their search engine does, what happens? That's a utility at this point. The world doesn't function the way it does without it. So that's a tough question. But again, like you said, there's typically an overcorrection. The time in the world we live in now is great for tech, but it's also tough for tech because the big players in tech, which again, they represent a very small portion of tech companies, but they kind of set the standard for what's allowed and what's not allowed, which means startups go in their direction. Hey, if it's okay to collect everything and then sell ads, why don't we do that? They follow their example. So of course you make an example out of a big company and all the startups start producing things other than data collection machines and social networks, which is good, but ultimately there has to be a big learning curve because there's no Google search anymore. So it's a tough topic for sure.
Well, and then, I mean, anything can be argued in law.
Absolutely.
But, I mean, then what happens with RSS, feed readers? So Feedly, Flipboard, what happens with podcatchers? So, I mean,
are APIs okay anymore? Is using a web API all right? Because technically you're accessing web data through automated means. Does that become okay? Is that not allowed anymore? So how do companies share data? Yeah, there's a big inference there. But the problem is there are certain players in the tech industry that misuse that and then will start crying about what we're talking about right now. Oh, the web won't work the same way it does if I don't do this. It's like, well, no, the web doesn't work the same way it does if this technology is not allowed. The way you're using it is not the way it's intended to be used because it's kind of malicious. Like, that's not cool. You can't do that. Or you shouldn't be able to.
Yeah.
So then where do you draw the line? And I hope they draw the line on the side where we can still use these services. We can still build these services. We can still make the world a more communicative, more open place. I mean, I know there's big movements to decentralize the web, which I think would be great, but it's going to be tough to release that stranglehold that a lot of people have on what was meant to be an open platform. Berners-Lee didn't intend it to be this way, and it is now. So how are we going to get back to that if we are? And what's going to happen in the meantime?
What type of companies don't think they need your service or wouldn't know they need your service that should really consider it?
Any data-driven company, I think, needs an aggregator of some kind. And I've talked to some environmental services that were super interested in the potential, but ultimately weren't really interested in pulling the trigger. I talked to a lot of companies in environmental services or financial services that have a big data set of their own data and call it good, which is fine for most purposes. But I think if you have a big data set you've built yourself and it's built with some errors involved, then your entire data set is going to be fundamentally biased, right? That's machine learning 101, is unbiased data. Whereas if you have a service that allows you to collect similar publicly available data on the same topic, you can cross-reference and you can clean your data better. So that's another thing, that machine learning and data science don't really work without data, and data isn't always producible in-house. So any data-driven service that either needs to cross-reference but doesn't want to, copy and paste 4 gigabytes worth of strings into a CSV file, or a company that wants to solve a problem based on what data is available and have no means of getting it. Because again, it's 4 gigabytes of text that they need to copy and paste by hand. So basically financial, medical, I think would be huge, because how many medical journals are there out there that talk about things that doctors should know, surgeons should know, but it's the patients bringing those articles in and going, hey, this is what I found on bloodless surgery. This is what I found on the use of surgical steel. And the surgeon who does this for a living goes, I did not know that. I think that's kind of weird. That's like a fundamental thing that they should know. Like, hey, there's a better way of making people not die. I never heard of that. Well, I read this blog after a quick Google search, and here it is, accredited by Brigham and Women's or Harvard Medical School, whatever. I think that data should be more readily available. And I feel like getting that most current stuff into the hands of the people that need it, either in finance or medicine or environmental control. Again, a lot of studies out there, if you look at them through the scientific method, they do have flaws. But that doesn't mean all the data they collect is irrelevant. A lot of people kind of yes or no, pass, fail on that. Like, oh, this study on the polar ice says this, but there's one piece in it that's up for interpretation, therefore the whole study's invalid. Well, if you had an opportunity to be able to cross-reference that one study with the 40 other identical studies that have been published and feed it into something that can say, okay, they all agree on this and none of them agree on that. Or they all agree on this and this is something that's kind of in the gray area. I think that moves forward the ability to make decisions based on public studies, is because we have all the data that's kind of been compiled, aggregated, cleaned, and then displayed in a way that's unbiased, that makes sense, and that basically isn't telling you anything it thinks, is basically saying, hey, these facts appear in all of these journals, and these facts don't appear in any of them except this one, et cetera, et cetera. So you can make a more informed decision rather than saying, did you hear, or did you read that this guy did, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, that's part of what we're trying to solve with Medit.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. We're aggregating all of the medical information on the web through blogs, journals, websites.
That's awesome.
Social, everything out there that a doctor may need to know.
Yeah.
And putting it into their hands and using machine learning to sift out the right content for them based on their preferences, their specialty, their location, their behavior, and peer-to-peer recommendations. So we're trying to make it easier. I mean, there's so much content in medicine that it's impossible to keep up with.
Oh, my word, yeah. And the fact that every journal is 6,000 words and you have to read 12 of them to even know what they're talking about.
Yes.
I'm not reading 72,000 words just to find out what the best scalpel is to use. I honestly don't care that much. It's important, but I have people that I need to take limbs off of and replace with prosthetics right now. I can't do that. That's amazing. That's really cool. Okay. Yeah. Good for you guys. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're really happy with it. I mean, it's a startup, so long way to go. But
there you go. It's always a long way to go for sure.
Oh yeah, that's we've been working on it for almost 2 years now.
Wow.
It feels like we're almost to the starting line.
There you go. It's like you're banditing the Boston Marathon. You've got to start the race 2 miles before the starting line, and then it's 26.2. Yeah, absolutely, of course. I get that. Very cool.
Is there anything that we haven't covered that you definitely want to get off your chest or make sure listeners would know about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first and foremost, in the field of machine learning, I know this is something that's big on people, and this is something that I say to a lot of folks. In the field of machine learning and AI, is something that scare a lot of people. And I only have to say one word and it describes it, which is Skynet. Everybody thinks that's what's coming. Everybody thinks that Terminator is coming. And it's always been my opinion that it really depends on what these bots are taught, what AI is taught. Because, it is like putting a 4-year-old sociopath in Arnold Schwarzenegger's body and just saying, go do what you think is cool. Yeah, that's not going to end well. I get that. But you're just as likely to get Lieutenant Commander Data from Star Trek as you are a Terminator. And I think the difference is, if you know about those two fandoms, and I'm sure most of your listeners do, Terminator was an AI that was developed exclusively, the Skynet, for instance, exclusively for combat. That was it. It was designed to analyze war scenarios, come out with the way that the United States wins under every circumstance, and then it became self-aware, and people freaked out and tried to shut it down. Now, what I've always thought is, at that point, Skynet becomes self-aware and goes, hey, I'm alive. If people don't freak out, If people just acknowledge that and then try to teach it that human life does have value, what happens? Then you look the same thing with, the idea of like Data from Star Trek. He wanted to be human. He wanted to empathize. Why? Because he was raised in a laboratory where people loved him and raised him like a child. I think if you teach whatever an AI is taught, that's what it's going to do best if ever it becomes self-aware. So if you teach it that human life has value, then you get Lieutenant Commander Data. If you teach it that it's okay to kill so long as the person is quote unquote the enemy, you get Terminator. That's a big thing that I wanted to speak to people. But also when it comes to machine learning in your daily lives, I also want non-technical users to know machine learning is a scary term, but ultimately the machines that we're teaching at this point are not that smart. Even the really, really smart AIs that are out there, like your Watsons, or even the bots that Boston Dynamics or androids that Boston Dynamics is building that can do interviews and things like that. It's ultimately really, really, really clever automation. Those machines are not thinking for themselves. So be a little bit gentle on us ML developers. We're not building intelligent machines that are going to do iRobot. Will Smith isn't going to come busting through your wall at any moment with a fake arm chasing robots, although I'm sure some people would love that.
Yeah.
That's just not even close. And I think there's so much more that can be done in machine learning other than Project Maven. And there is so much more useful stuff done in the field of automation and machine learning and artificial intelligence than simply drone strikes that kill people. That's not what the field is about. And I don't think that's where it's headed. Because even when Google said, Project Maven, we're not even getting paid that much from the government, which basically means there are far more lucrative uses for this technology than death. And these companies developing them are all about keeping as far in the black as they can, which means as long as there are more profitable uses for AI than war, then we're not going to get Skynet. And even if it became more profitable for war, we're not getting Skynet anytime soon. Nothing is going to be self-aware anytime soon, as far as I'm thinking, unless something amazing happens.
There's so much of what people call AI is little more than pattern recognition.
Absolutely.
I mean, there are. I am by no means a machine learning or an AI expert. That's why I have data engineers.
Yeah.
I keep all the bits working together, and they make them smarter. But
absolutely,
it's all about pattern recognition and sorting and probabilities and things like that. Nothing that is being created right now has a desire.
No, at all. No.
Until something has a desire or is programmed with one, there's no way that it's going to go and try to take over the world unless it's been programmed to do everything that it can to replicate itself or to remove any sorts of threats to its existence.
Right. And what we all need to remember is that any machine, no matter how advanced at this point, only follows human instruction. The code that is in it is built by people.
Yep.
It is written by folks. And it is. And all code is a set of instructions. A lot of people ask what the different, what is firmware? It's a set of instructions. What is software? It's a slightly prettier set of instructions. It's anything that we tell a machine, it does. And that's why when you look at a compiler error and people are like, this stupid language, it's like, listen, the machine's only doing exactly what you told it, which means if it's wrong, you told it wrong. And that's frustrating for all of us. I get it. I yell at my computer sometimes, and then I apologize.
That's
weird.
that's why, as technologists, we spend all day swinging back and forth between I'm a genius, I'm an idiot, I'm a genius, I'm an idiot.
Absolutely.
So absolutely. Try to spend more time on the genius side and less time on the idiot side.
And that success is like the success at batting in baseball.
Yes.
If you're on the genius side 3 out of 10 times and the idiot side 7, you are a legend.
Exactly.
You have a lifetime. If you're batting a lifetime 300 at genius, you are legendary. You are Nikola Tesla at this point because he only got one thing right that the world remembers, and that's alternating current. So he was 1 out of 10 and is the foremost genius of the past 2 centuries. Just think about that, guys. Think about it out there. Yep, absolutely. And don't be afraid of your technology. Whether you're a developer, whether you're a junior, whether you're mid-level, senior, which I don't know what those terms mean, but if you are, doesn't matter who you are, or if you're a user, administrator, don't be afraid of your tech. Yes. Oh my word, it's not out to get you, but it's also not out to just annoy you. Like, it's not doing what it's doing to spite you. It doesn't feel like that. Although I will say, there is a professor of psychology at Northeastern University. I do forget his name, but he is working with Harvard and MIT right now to try and quantify emotional data points for uploading to machines. Therefore, the problem that sci-fi brings out, that machines can't feel, therefore they're genocidal, may be solved before machines are self-aware. They're trying to give them emotions. So don't worry, your machines are okay. Don't yell at Siri. She can't understand you. You know, she doesn't understand that you're saying 95 instead of 295. It's okay. She'll learn. She'll learn. She's all right. Plus, Apple Map sucks. Download Google Map. Don't do that.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
You as well. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Until next time, remember, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.